All right. Okay, I'm going to do just a quick introduction for us. Hi, my name's Raiden, and this is my co-host, Erik.
Hello.
On this podcast, we sit down with people doing cool things in Calgary, and today's guest is extra special. Alfred Sorensen is CEO and director of Pierdae Energy, and he's also a close family friend and mentor to Erik. Alfred and Erik's dad, Dale, were good friends and business partners, and since his passing a few years ago, Erik has been working a little bit with Alfred as well. With over 30 years of experience in the energy industry, Alfred is a real leader in his field. He's been CEO of Canadian Spirit Resources and a founder of Galveston LNG, which was the first new liquefaction facility permitted in North America in over 40 years. We're so excited to have him on the podcast today to hear his story and learn about his journey. Welcome, Alfred.
Thank you very much for having me.
How's it going?
Very well, Eric. Good to see you again as well.
Good to see you too.
Good to meet you, and thanks for being on here.
My pleasure.
Okay. So, Alfred, tell us a bit about yourself. What's the format of this is very informal. So,
All right.
I guess we'll start with how's the day been? I mean, the weather's crazy outside right now here in Calgary.
Well, being in the energy industry, we like it nice and cold, so it's this is a good thing, I suppose.
Yeah.
So a little bit of pain for everybody else, but good for us.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. So I guess in my intro there, you've been 30 years of experience in the energy industry. How'd you get into it, and where does that story
Begin.
take us?
So, well, I'm originally from Edmonton, and I went to the University of Alberta, where I got my degree in business and commerce. I'm also a chartered accountant by trade, and it's really how my journey begins, I guess, is soon after I became a chartered accountant, I was looking for something new to do, and I joined Today, which is a reasonably recognized energy business. Direct Energy is one of their original employees, where I was started off as the controller and then eventually moved into energy trading. And just at the same time as both Canada and the United States were beginning their journey to deregulate energy in North America.
So
and,
what year is that, if you can? So
that'd be like 1988.
Okay.
So
sorry,
well
continue.
before both of you.
Yeah.
So
88 Olympics. Yeah.
So I worked at Direct for a couple of years, and then one of the other fellows I worked with there, and I decided that we could do our own trading business, and we started a company called Continental Energy. And Continental was had great ambitions. That's why it's a big name to try and trade gas all across North America. And that is how I ended up meeting Erik's father. He came from Saskatchewan to join us just as we were selling our company to an American company. And becomes a big part of how I get to where I am is after running Duke Energy's Canadian business for a couple of years, I had an opportunity to move to London, England, and I lived in London for several years and running Duke Energy's European business. And it's from the time I spent when I went to the UK, it was kind of an opportunity to start a new business. The company itself wanted to have a subsidiary based in Europe, primarily to attract new investment from European investors. And their kind of motto was, well, why would we invest in you if you're not invested in Europe? So that's how we ended up starting our business there. And it was roughly about 10 of us began it. And when I returned to North America, we had about 300 people.
And so at that point, when 88, that's kind of when you went your own way. If that's
From an accounting perspective, yes.
Okay.
From an energy perspective, it was just the very beginning.
Just the very beginning.
Yeah.
And then moving to London, when
would that be? Almost 2000. So
2000.
Quite a bit of time has passed already in that period of time. So I went from being a neophyte in the energy business to a more seasoned leader by that point in time. And given that's one of the reasons at that time, Duke probably employed roughly about 22,000 people. So to be chosen to move to London was quite an honor.
And how did you like living in London?
Well, I love living in London. It's probably the best job I ever had. It was because we were getting to start something new.
Yep.
It was at a time when, although electricity was much further developed from a deregulation perspective than North America was, from a gas perspective, it was very new. So we had lots of opportunity to do new things as well as when we were over there, or when I was over there. And it kind of laid the foundation for starting my own new business when I came back to Canada. So I would say I liked it enough that I'm actually leaving for London on Saturday. So I will
wow.
be there for a week or so on business and some pleasure. So I'm very much looking forward. It hasn't been the first time back to London since this whole COVID thing happened. So
Yep.
it's kind of exciting from that
Oh,
perspective.
that's awesome.
And like I said, so out of my experience in London, it really allows me to start this new business back in Canada with on the LNG side, liquefied natural gas. And at that time, this is now kind of like 2004, 2005, that there was a group of individuals, Tom Dawson, who still works with me today, Dale, Eric's father. We said, hey, we have a lot of experience in dealing with commodities going through restructuring. This one hasn't gone through restructuring yet, so let's see what we can do to build a business. And that really is what begins what we eventually called Galveston LNG. And it was a project based in British Columbia, in the town of Kitimat. And so it becomes, it started off as a facility that was looking to import natural gas into North America at a time when the view was North America was very short natural gas.
And this is so you coming back from London to start Galveston. That's what time is this?
So around 2003, 2004.
2002,
So
2004.
I spent about 2.5 years in London. So
Yeah, and so that so you guys were initially looking to import because what was the kind of
the dynamics.
yeah
behind it,
the market dynamics that was wanting that
making that work.
yeah
So at that time, probably Western Canadian gas prices were in around $10 a gigajoule, which is the heating unit. So if you were to look at your utility bill, you would see at the very top of it whatever your monthly consumption was in gigajoules. And so that price was roughly about $10. So to put that in perspective, this is like 2004. So, what's that, almost 9 years ago. Today the price is roughly about $3. So considerably more expensive, and it looked like North America was running out of natural gas. And so that was why we were looking to bring it from a foreign country into Canada. So about 2 years into the process of building the facility, we realized that there was a change about, and we were the very first company to recognize that. So at that time, we were one of maybe 20 projects looking to bring gas into various parts of North America, whether the Gulf Coast, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean. So it was certainly kind of one of the. We were smart enough to be ahead of the curve. So when we sold the business, we invested about $30 million, and we sold it for just over $300 million.
wow.
That's
a nice ROI.
Yeah, yes, it was. Yeah. For the time, for the investment horizon was very nice as well. But what we realized before anyone else did that the LNG or the natural gas business in North America is about to go under a fundamental change. And that fundamental change was that unconventional gas they had found the magic sauce to extract that gas out of the rock. Mm-hmm. And we went from having a shortage to a massive surplus. Mm-hmm. And that's why exporting to other countries suddenly became the right answer.
Yeah.
So,
and so at that, and that's the same kind of time period that market shift happened. Was that
around 2007 or 8, and so we sold the company about 2 years later.
Okay.
So by this time, and that was one of the reasons why we were able to extract significant value, was that we were the only permitted facility, and that uniqueness is what was valuable. Yeah. And no different than any other business where you tend to be at the very front, you tend to be worth more than the guy at the very end. So, so that's kind of how we we ended that project, or we sold it to American companies in 2010, and then we started Pierdae, our current company, or my current company, in roughly 2 years later, and but that project was based on the east coast of Canada, and so Goulboro, Nova Scotia, is about 150 kilometers north of Halifax as the crow flies. And it takes a little longer to drive there because it's not there is no direct route. So
windy
something like that. So and the whole premise behind our this decision to try and do this was because I'd spent enough time in London that I had quite a good number of connections to major utilities, and one of them was the major utility of Germany, E.ON at the time. And at that time, E.ON was already at a point where they wanted to diversify risk away from Russia. And so that's obviously become very topical in the last year, particularly as we are the next day or so. It'll be the 1 year anniversary of the invasion.
But at this time, when you were starting this process, what year would have that been?
This would have been like 2012. So
okay,
so it's if you think about it from everything,
that's quite some foresight you had. Yeah.
If you think about a year ago, what was about to happen, and certainly in the early months of the invasion of Ukraine, and people talking about what Germany should or should not have done, that one of the things that was often mentioned was that they put all their eggs in one basket and trusted the Russians, and which really, in our experience, was not necessarily true, because the government of Germany was well before that there was any of this talk of invading Ukraine, that was willing to financially support our LNG project to the tune of roughly $4.5 billion US. So it was an interesting time to start and think, well, then why did the project never get built? And a lot of that has to do, I think, with Canadian politics today. Certainly by 2015, obviously there's a change in government here in Canada, and that government has very much a decarbonization agenda, and roughly at the same time, energy prices take a extreme turn for the worst. So being able to raise capital was difficult. To raise capital in a country that was, from a regulatory perspective,
Not
becoming
very
difficult. Other than perhaps the German government, who had the foresight to see that maybe Russia wasn't going to be such a great partner, that they continued to work with us for quite a few months. And
so, which regulatory? So for this is the project in Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia, that's correct. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, it's what's the name of the place?
It's called Goulboro, Nova Scotia.
Goulboro. So, and speaking from friends, it's in terms of regulatory. It's usually you're dealing with a mixture of the province and the
federal government.
Government, right? And so I guess what does that look like in terms of like proving out a project to them, and what are some of the things they look for, and then what are some of the things that goes from I guess what is the difference between a government that's supportive of a project and then a switch to a government that's not supportive, and what do they say, or is it just like hard no or hard yes or?
Well, I think the one thing, so because within both provincial and federal, so you have to think a little bit how Canada's organized, and so constitutionally some areas are under provincial jurisdiction, and other areas are under federal jurisdiction. Yeah. So whenever you are dealing with any type of product that crosses provincial boundaries, you fall into federal regulation, and anything that is within the province falls under provincial regulation. So when you look at pipelines or railways or anything where goods or services are traveling over provincial boundaries, you've got to deal with the federal government as well. Yeah. And this is kind of where Canada can become quite a bit different than other countries, in that you tend in mostly in European countries. It's mostly federal jurisdiction, whereas in Canada, the provinces have a significant say as to what is going on. And importantly, for a project like ours, resource development is exclusively in the realm of provincial jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. So the natural gas itself is being regulated by the province, and the how you get the gas to the place we want it to get to is being regulated by the federal government. So you've got two different masters with sometimes different agendas.
It's quite the balancing act.
Very much so.
I guess my follow-up question to that is, as a leader of a company, how do you, I guess you kind of have to sharpen your diplomacy skills a little bit, and that's a challenging situation to be in, I would imagine, sometimes. And how do you, I guess, for a young person a young person who wants to develop kind of leadership potential within the energy space, and realizing that that's kind of a situation that they're, at least for the near term, that they're going to have to deal with. What are some skills that are important in considering if they want to be, looking to get into a leadership position in an energy company?
Well, I think right now, certainly, I think my view, fossil fuels aren't going away for a long time. Yep. That there is no easy way to convert energy on a mass production perspective which would allow energy costs to remain relatively low. So yes, decarbonization might be a good idea, but it's probably one that has a very long runway to go. And so I think when, if someone's younger thinking, well, is the fossil fuel industry something that should be of interest to me? I still think there is a significant amount of upside to the industry, that it's not a sunset industry. I think that as some describe it there as, that there is still a very large role for fossil fuels to play in the energy industry as a whole. So I think when you think about how do you get to a leadership position, I think probably some of the things that are important is, I think, from a technical skill perspective, that there still is a great need coming out of post-secondary studies, that to have people who with the technical skills, and because that it all really kind of boils down to the science and the end analysis. And so and I think we see a lot of younger people kind of going away from the energy industry, and it like I look at our own company, and although we're a very young company from an age perspective, we actually are kind of getting along in the tooth, and it's kind of one of my goals is to try and get more younger people into the company, just because I'm
kind of curious about that, because that's kind of like so my background a little bit is like I graduated from engineering at Queen's University, I guess 2022, and I took some time off before finishing my degree, just for personal reasons, and but so one of the advantages of that was that all my friends within that program graduated before I did, so they're a little bit further in their kind of career than I am, so I can kind of look at them and be like, okay, what looks good, what doesn't look so great, and like what's the feel out there a little bit.
Gotta scope it out first.
Yeah, they can scope it out for me, exactly.
There you go.
And I guess that's like a lot of people talk about like, shortage of workers, and or like shortage of talent, and I guess I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, as kind of leading a big ship somewhere. Is there I guess, what are you finding that is attracting young talent, or what are some of the challenges of attracting young talent in the energy sector? Because I could imagine that's kind of anecdotally what I've heard, is it is tough to hold on to people a little bit, and people will kind of jump ship sometimes. And so I guess I'm just kind of curious about how your take on that perspective, and
Like what the
or
market's looking like almost.
yeah, a little bit.
Well, I think there's certainly, I think, within the education system, a bias against the fossil fuel industry right now.
Yeah.
So I think fewer people are coming in. And the second part, the bigger issue, I think that any kind of commodity business, the commodity can go up and it can go down, and it can create a lot of havoc in one's life.
Yeah.
And so it's and I think that that's also been a deterrent to younger people coming into the industry, is the fact that it's very feast or famine. When it's rocking on all cylinders, it's a paying, highly attractive place to be. When commodity prices are lower, costs get cut very quickly, and it's easiest to cut people than it is to cut equipment.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of been a bit of a deterrent, as well as people looking at the longevity, or the particular, if they've got parents or relatives who have been in the industry and been laid off 2 or 3 times in a 10-year period, that it's like, well, do I really want to get involved in that? So, but when I look at our company, and I think that the younger people that do work for us, that it still offers a very challenging, unique business, in the fact that it does have a lot of challenges in trying to sell its story, and how we go through decarbonization over the next 20, 30 years. And I think when we think about, jobs that maybe didn't exist 10 years ago that exist today, that, particularly from an engineering or risk management perspective, all of this decarbonization is bringing new opportunities to do different things. And so my view would be that, particularly from an engineering perspective, that there's still a lot of really different and interesting opportunities in the industry as a whole. And like I said, because it's not going to go away anywhere soon. And it, even if you think about electric cars, and the desire to have everybody driving an electric car by 2035, how realistic that is, because where does electricity come from? And you think of where we live, and if you ever go out, maybe an hour after dark, in our part of the world, the wind stops blowing. Yeah. Just because of how close we are to the mountains, it is very, very, the calmest part of the day is almost always an hour after sunset. So, which corresponds to the same amount of time people start turning their lights on to light their house. So, and the other interesting thing about where we live, when it gets exceptionally cold, the wind also stops blowing. So, and so in the wintertime, the sun is probably at a 17 to 19% angle above the horizon, making solar power very difficult. So when we look at renewable options for like where we live, it will never be big enough to electrify the entire industry. And I think that's the dishonest play that we see politicians making. Is like, yes, it all sounds great in theory, but we live in a place throughout Canada that the reason there aren't many people living here is because until energy prices became low enough, that attracted more people to live here. The reason more people live in the United States is because the weather's better. Yeah. And so if you really want to decarbonize Canada, depopulate it. So it's so hopefully not using that as a solution. That and that's why I think there's still significant, and we have a very large resource base. Yeah. So it's I still think there's plenty of opportunity for.
A big question I have would be like, I think about when you and my dad started out, like what would be some major differences for people trying to make it on their own right now in the industry versus how you guys went about it.
Well, I think that if I was going to compare now to 20 years ago, about that long, maybe 25 years already now, that I think the opportunities were different. So, if you look at the skill sets of which came out of the whole deregulation scenario, one of the biggest things is risk management. And when you look at how risk management plays a role, not just in the fossil fuel industry, but even in agriculture. If you were a farmer 25, 30 years ago, you raised your cattle, you sent your cattle to market, you planted grain in the spring, you harvested in the fall. Today, it's a much more difficult business in the fact that there's a futures market that tells you what the value of your wheat or barley or pigs or cows might be, and your decision now is like, should I forward sell or manage my risk by using the commodity markets to do so, and so a much more sophisticated environment, and I think that's applies both in a lot of the different industries that exist today. So I think that's kind of the single biggest difference. And so today, I just the other day I was out for because of the sale of the company and I'm a major supporter of the University of Alberta, and the professor whose professorship I sponsor, he teaches mostly risk management, and he had a little thing a few nights ago with his graduate students, and when you look at the different jobs these individuals have, all of them in risk management, but all of them doing very different things and how different organizations think about how they manage risk. And I think that's probably the single biggest difference is before, people just took the blows, like the price went up, you won, if the price went down, you lost. And whereas today you can manage your position much more, no different than if you think about investing, like if your parents or your grandparents, investing was, putting money in a savings account. Today, you can do all sorts of different things that you couldn't do before. So,
yeah. Okay, a couple. I guess a couple things there. You mentioned. Okay, so a lot more emphasis on kind of risk management in terms of like in the financial market or the futures market. What are, I guess, for someone who's interested in that, I guess so when you make a hire into your risk management team, where are most of those people coming from? Are they coming from an accounting background? Are they coming from an engineering background?
Well, I think that it could be from a variety of different locations or education backgrounds now, mainly because there's a lot of interdisciplinary teaching now, whereas before that's probably another very big change. If you went to engineering school 20, 30 years ago, you probably studied engineering and that was it. And whereas today that probably is not the fact. As a matter of fact, even because I do quite a bit of stuff at the U of A, that when you listen about how they try to make more rounded students, so that engineering students take courses in commerce students take more courses in the sciences, so that you have people who quantitative analysis is just a part of what you are, and risk management is all about quantitative analysis. So when you think about, like I said, some of the job titles these young people were talking to me about, I said one was a data engineer. And it's like, well, what is a data engineer? Like what does that exactly mean? And her background wasn't engineering, but it wasn't about putting motor and cement together. It was about how does data predict the future. And so I think, and it really comes down, I think, to really the STEM sciences in the end, right? Understanding mathematics, spending time in the sciences, that you could come from a variety of different backgrounds. And I think even if you look at how banks, who also, risk management of banks is considerably different, that they don't tend to have one type of person. Like a bunch of finance students or a bunch of accountants. It's because people have different skill sets, and it's all of them have maybe math in common, but I think that there's different ways of entering into a risk management position, only because when you look at managing risk, it's not all about the futures markets. Like there's a lot of physical risk management as well.
Yeah. So go ahead, Eric.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, and this might be coming out of left field, but in terms of the risk management side of things, my dad, he was the, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the CFO at Galveston LNG, correct? And what was that like in terms of like, I guess what I'm trying to ask here, I guess what was it like working with him on the big business side of things?
Well, I think when you think about when I first met Dale, that was kind of how he kind of came into our first company, was the fact that that's what he was becoming an expert in, was in risk management. And and the whole idea of managing internal risk was really quite new. And so I think that, like, by the time we had Galveston, we were, we might have had fancy titles, but we were jacks of all trades and masters of none. But again, really very much understanding, like, how do you, in the case of the LNG project, what we were really managing is the risk between Alberta gas prices and international prices, and that spread in between, how that was going to be managed over a 20-year period. So, and that's what financing people and investors wanted to understand better. Like, how do you manage that risk between what it's worth here today and what it's worth in the future when you have position here A and position B over here? And, if you think about, I'm going to say, if you don't go away from a fossil fuel example and move towards more like I think farming is an interesting business these days, that how different, you've got the biggest production area in the world for wheat and barley being invaded. Suddenly the entire economics of growing worldwide's changed. And so there's different opportunities to manage that risk, and you can manage it different ways, right? You say, okay, I don't want to get involved in the futures market, but maybe I go get a market in Japan to buy my wheat or whatever the product we're talking about. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to lock in my transportation between the farm and the Port of Vancouver. So, like, there's a variety, like I said, risk management can be really different. Yep. in that it's a different, or you could put it another, here's another good way, is, we have a flood back in 2015, I think it was, right? 2013. So that, and you think about, how they're managing that risk today was like, well, okay, we want to build the dam up out by Springbank, and yes, that might work good for the people downstream of the Elbow River, but the people upstream of are losing their grazing land or whatever. So, but it's another form of risk management, right? And this is all physical versus financial. So, so I think that's kind of what goes back to, to go back to when we started first getting into this business. Risk management was much more simpler today than it is today. It's a much larger industry, and if you were to look at when we were both just young gas traders, there was an industry in Alberta or Calgary of probably 3,500 people. Today it's maybe 500 or 600, but the risk management side is probably a couple of thousand. So it's a very much like everything, it changes over time, and technology plays a big role in that. Sort of what we're doing right here now. You wouldn't be doing this 5 years ago. So it's that's another kind of different way you can see how jobs that didn't exist 5 years ago are something that exists today, and even the way people think of their career today. There's many people who wouldn't think that they're going to be doing the same thing for 25 years.
Yeah.
And whereas your dad, myself, we were probably outliers in that we changed jobs regularly, and that really wasn't the thing. Probably when I was graduating university, people were looking for 25 to 30-year jobs, but that world has gone away now. Like, it's unless you go to work for government, then you can still find that job.
Yeah.
So,
what was working with Dale like?
Well, from my perspective, like I said, we got along very well, and very different people, but a common respect for each other's skill sets. Mm-hmm. um, Dale's not only was a big person, he was a big personality, and that always makes some either you really love him or you hate him, right? So kind of a guy. So, but it's like I said a while back, I miss him a lot because he was a very good friend and somebody who you could have a conversation about that could be very esoteric at times, and because you're dealing with things that I was trying to predict what the future looks like based on very sketchy present or recent past events. So it was I think like if you were to ask somebody else who knew Dale, my relationship with him would be considerably different than I think most people's was, and just because we kind of had a very common educational background. We were both chartered accountants. We actually did an article at the same office, but we both came from Deloitte, so we had a very similar education background, and then we, because we shared a career development plan that went very similar, that or path, maybe a better word, that we became very close from that perspective. So and I think because when Dale decided he wanted to move from Saskatchewan to Alberta, that I was the kind of the guy that facilitated that. That we had a different relationship than I would say he had with his other friends. So
What was it? The office that you guys were at, was that on 4th Street, right by Sheldon Schumier?
Galveston, you mean? Yeah. It was a kitty corner from there. Yes.
There was this was a while ago. I can't remember what year this was, but there was some guy that was driving a little too fast and damaged one of the pillars outside the front of the building with it was a Ferrari or something like that.
Yes.
Is that you?
No, it wasn't me, but I saw it.
Oh, wow.
I barely missed the accident itself, but I saw the aftermath. So it was, what was it? It might have been a Ferrari, and he only had it for a week.
Oh.
And he was coming down 12th Avenue, and then he missed the, overshot the, luckily, nobody was standing on that corner. That when he hit, there was and no passenger. Yeah. Like the car was completely severed in two pieces, and it just so happened this was on a Saturday morning, and I had left my car overnight at the office, and my gym was just up the road, and when I came, it was like, what the hell just happened here? Because he was gone already. So because the guy was remarkably unhurt. Enough I think he still had to go to the hospital, but there was nothing left. The car was still there, and there was nothing left of it. But
interesting art piece.
So
how long ago was this?
Oh, that was a long time ago. I think it was later than what you think.
It would have been a while ago,
like 2008 or 9, I think, because it was before we sold the company. That was 2010. So
I remember going to that office, not a ton, but a few times with my dad, and I thought it was just the coolest thing on the planet.
It was a very cool office, though. Yeah. It had a different vibe about the whole place.
Yeah, it was nice.
So do you work and live in Calgary?
Yes.
Now, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've lived here since the '88 Olympics. So.
Oh, nice.
So, I wasn't here when they left, because I moved here a couple months after. And 10 years later, they were still talking like it happened last week. So even now they're going on and on about it, right? So
they were trying to bring the Olympics back.
I think it was
big
for the city for sure.
Like 3 years ago, I think. Already.
Yeah, they were trying to bring it back for the winter one.
Yeah. Well, keep going, Calgary. Come on, now. You got it. Okay, and so you knew obviously Dale before Erik came along.
Yes.
How did Dale change after he had kids, or did he change?
Well, you should ask his mother that question, not me.
That's loaded,
I don't think he changed at all. That was the problem.
My dad, he was it's hard if you don't know him, but he was brilliant in so many ways, and almost aloof in other ones. But he was loud and he was boisterous and but he had the biggest heart out of anyone I know. So
Yeah. Yeah, he's awesome.
I used to always say to Eric's mom, I said, her and I had similar problems with Dale, so that was hard to keep him focused focused on any one thing for very long.
Yeah.
So I think it was a similar problem sometimes. It would be like, kids that have ADD grow up to be adults who have it, so it doesn't go away. It was a little bit of that. So but I think one thing that I always admired about him, and your mother for that matter, is that they raised 3 very, very stellar citizens and their 3 sons. So.
Yeah, we try our best, and pass it on to the next, Dixon run around. So.
Yeah, for sure. Alfred, do you have any children of your own?
Nope, I'm a confirmed bachelor, I guess.
Okay, fair enough. Any pets?
No, because I travel a lot.
Okay.
I should have got one during the COVID, but then you have to take them with you.
Yeah,
I like dogs a lot.
Okay.
I have a sister who's completely enamored with them. She has like a herd of them.
Oh,
nice.
So it's
so whenever you need
I just need a dog. I just go borrow one from her. So
perfect.
Raiden's a pretty recent new dog owner.
Yep.
Semi. How long has it been now that you've had Violet?
It'll be about a year in April. We got a little a dash hound, or a wiener dog, as other people call it. She's pretty funny. She's the reason I was late today. I had to deal with her a little bit. So she's very.
Well, this is kind of hard weather for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Too low to the ground.
Stuck in the snow.
She doesn't like going outside when it's this cold. Yeah, she's very cute, very funny. It was funny. I went and visited my my brother on Vancouver Island this weekend, and he has a dog probably about 10 times the size. It's just a medium-sized pit bull Labrador mix kind of thing, a bit of a mutt, but he's way bigger than she is. And then when I came back home, I got back yesterday, and I come home and it's like she just seems like a little tiny peanut. She seems smaller than normal, right? Yeah.
Or a snack for the other dog.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah. Some good coyote food. Jeez Louise. Yeah. Okay, so Alfred, what okay, so you knew so when did you first meet Dale, and then how did you convince him? Were you the person who convinced him to move out from Saskatchewan?
No, not at all. So the first time I met Dale was so he was the manager of risk for Sask Energy, and so we shared a mutual friend, and that mutual friend worked for Continental at the time, and so Mike was, I guess Mike really wasn't the friend. It was Mike's girlfriend, Lisa, who was the friend. And Lisa also worked with Dale and Tom at Sask Energy. So, and then they all wanted to move to Alberta, I guess. So eventually they all do. And our risk manager, who I didn't have a very good working relationship with, resigns one day, and we hired Dale to replace him. So,
did you have any say in that, or was it
just
this is your new working partner?
So maybe the guy didn't like that.
No comment.
Well, it's I didn't mind saying that because I used to say it to his face. So because I was an owner of the other company as well. So when we worked for Rex, it was Rex really liked him, but I was kind of glad when he quit. So it was just a blessing. So sometimes you have to be lucky to be good, and that was a good example of that. So but the timing was good. Stevens left, and Dale was looking for a move, and he agreed to come work for us. So, which I think it probably, although Dale could take risks, I think underlying he was actually a very conservative person, and working for kind of a small, very risk tolerant trading company. I think was a bit eye-opening at first. So if anyone turned into a bit of a rogue, was probably us. So, but we had a lot of fun. So it was a little bit like a frat house for most of until we sold it to the Americans. But before that, it was a lot more fun. So but it was that view that I think one of the reasons Dale took the job was because he anticipated the sale was coming. And it was like, so I'll be back into my comfort zone of having a nice big balance sheet behind you. So, which makes life a lot easier, believe me.
I don't know if he ever did anything like this or if he was involved in these situations, but negotiations, was he involved in anything like that, or was he stubborn as a mule? Like,
well, I think when we we were building or trying to build our LNG business, because there were so few of us that you had to be a little bit more nimble. So sometimes, we would be like, okay, Eileen, you go with Dale this time to Australia to see if we can get supply to come to the LNG terminal. Or when we switched it around, your turn to go to Asia to see if we can sell it. So I think that we had, as a group of people, we had sometimes complementary skills and sometimes skills that gave us a broader base that different people could do different things. So, and I think that starting any new business, cost structure is always a issue.
Yeah.
And being able to be a jack of many trades versus
master of one
is a very difficult thing when you're just trying to start a new business. So,
for Pierdae, what did you take from, I guess, your previous experience that you're bringing into building an LNG? It's an LNG business.
Fundamentally today it's a production company because it started off as the project, and as we went through the tribulations of and everything we did to start the project came from the lessons we learned the first time. And simple things as simple as no customer, no project. So we went to find a customer, and that's how we get the Germans. We had to go through the environmental process. The site we chose was a site that had been previously permitted for another energy project, which made getting it permitting much easier. And so when you think from the first maybe 4 years, from 2012 to 13 to maybe 3.5 years, we were knocking off the to-do list one after another, and
it was rolling. Things were rolling,
and then we hit the walls. So I suppose you asked me earlier, like, was it working with Dale? And when we started Galveston, the one thing I said to Dale, I said, I don't want to work with you anymore because I want to be your friend first. and that was, and because we were, I think, honest with each other, that it never, and okay, I don't want to be your friend anymore either. So that never happened. That because there were things that could be about Dale that could be really kind of irksome sometimes. And so from my perspective, it's like I valued his friendship more than I did working with him again. So that was the only reason why he wasn't part of Pierdae, was that, and obviously changes in Eric's life, changed things as well, and his desire to be home, and that was a fundamental change in your whole family, right? And it
was,
and so but I would say, like the things with Pierdae, so how we changed as a company that was different than our first LNG project was that, Goldboro is a long ways away from here. So moving gas from Western Canada all the way to Eastern Canada and then putting it on a boat and putting it across the ocean, it's a big task. And there's a lot of cost involved in that. And so a lot of people didn't really kind of believe it was a good idea. So turned out to be a great idea, but that was neither here nor there at the point in time. So how we kind of turned into the company we are today is because we didn't get a lot of support from other production companies. We said, well, if you can't beat them, join them. So we started building our own production company. So today, like as I said, Pierdae has roughly about 300 employees. We produce about 38,000 barrel equivalent of energy a day. That's built mostly of natural gas, but some natural gas liquids and condensate. But the reason we are what we are today is because nobody wanted to be a part of our LNG project. So today we are, the LNG project continues to try and find ways to be successful. With the invasion of Ukraine, suddenly the government of Canada started changing its tune, and like the last year, the project's been in the news a lot. And but here's a very good example of you've got one or two people in the government who are very keen to be seen to be helpful to help Western Europe with its energy problems created by the invasion, and recognizing that if Western European countries lose interest in supporting Ukraine, Ukraine is lost.
Yep.
And so you look at the deputy prime minister, the finance minister is Chrystia Freeland.
Yeah.
She has a Ukrainian background. This has been a really important thing for her, and in dealing with when her speaking with me about how the LNG project can be helpful. My answer was, you should call 5 years ago. These things take a long time to build, and we're not solving Europe's problems anytime soon. So, and on the other side, you have a prime minister who, this is a good reason to decarbonize, is the way he thinks about it, and in the short term, that's probably not the answer people are looking for. Yeah, it turned out to be a mild winter. And Europeans didn't suffer too much, so that's why you still don't see them supportive.
Yeah. With the new election coming up here and Pierre Poilievre leading the Conservative Party, what are your thoughts on the next leadership race?
Leadership race or the actual election itself?
Yeah. The election. Sorry.
Yeah. So, the problem the Conservatives have, in my opinion, is the same problem the NDP have here. That their vote is very inefficient. So when you see opinion polls, they're ahead. Well, they're ahead because nobody will support the Liberals from the interior of BC to Winnipeg, and but then from Winnipeg East, nobody supports them. So maybe they look like they're doing great in the polls, but their vote is very inefficient. And so you look at the NDP; they have the same problem. They're very close with the UPC or UCP here in Alberta, but it's tilted by the fact that they have greater support in Edmonton and not support anywhere else. So our system, that you can't win like that.
Yeah.
No, it's obviously they didn't. The three elections that federal government's run, they only got a majority once, and they're probably destined to that same position, but. Can the Conservatives win enough seats to punt them out of the hard to say.
Yeah, you gotta please a lot of people in Toronto and Quebec in order to win a federal election.
Or you got to win the 905.
What is the 905? I don't know what that is.
The postal code, or the area code that surrounds Toronto.
Oh, okay.
So that's known as the 905. So like 416 is Toronto, 905 is everybody who lives around Toronto.
Yeah.
It's and that's
that's just kind of how the nature of the beast.
And that's the way. Yeah. So if you think about Harper, the reason he won was because he won the 905 plus Western Canada. Yeah. And he was the first prime minister to win a majority government in Canada without Quebec.
Wow.
And that was the big difference. So, but that coalition didn't hold together, and that's why we have what we have. So, and if you even think of our LNG project, it didn't start with bringing gas from Western Canada. It actually started by trying to develop natural resources in New Brunswick. And then we had a change in government to a Liberal government, and they put a ban on multi-stage fracking, which ended the Quebec bringing gas from New Brunswick into our project. So, like beginning of this conversation, you asked me a little while back that, how does government play a role in what we're doing? Has absolute role. And I said, you end up in this scenario where, you've got to deal with two levels of government that at any one time, you may not have all of them singing from the same song sheet.
Yeah, they all have to line up.
Question, what was your take on, so you mentioned that you met with Christina Freeland? Yeah, what was your take on, I'm not sure, how long was the meeting, what was the context, I guess?
Well, about how could Canada bring energy into Western Europe. And so, I think that, like I said, her motivation is driven by, what happens to Ukraine.
Yeah.
So, I might be talking out of school, but, if it wasn't Ukraine who got invaded, how interested would this government been?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not very interested, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so it's so I think that just as you see in the United States, you've got a very large split between a Democratic president who went so far as went to visit Ukraine earlier this week, to Republican congressmen who want to see aid to Ukraine either reduced or eliminated. So, and without the American backing, Ukraine would be lost already. Of course, that's Putin's point. That's why he keeps saying we're fighting the West, because if you weren't giving them guns, we'd have won a long time ago, right? So it's
what I guess just going back to Christina Freeland. So she as finance minister, how much, I guess, like the position of finance minister, how much
clout? Is that the word you're looking for?
I guess clout, but I guess competency. Do you think she's and competency is not really the word I'm looking for. I guess when it comes to when it comes to any natural resource within Canada, because I think one of the things I found anecdotally growing up, like, I guess, I've definitely been in the circle of people in the natural resource industry. So, I have a bit of bias to be like, and when I go, like, I went to school out at Queens and in Toronto, and it was just really interesting to see the stories people tell themselves about natural resources and how it changes depending on where you grew up. And it's very different for what I found, like, and I'm sure within the city of Calgary it's a little bit different, but kind of anecdotally within my background, I never really understood the fierce distaste for it, because it's just like, man, like, don't you realize, like, we need these things. It's like we need these things, like all these things, like the reason we're able to talk to you today, like it all kind of like, and sure, there's like, there's lots of situations where it's like, oh yeah, this could have been done better, or that could have been done better. But at the base of it, it's like you need all this stuff in order to live the life that you're living right now, in order to be like, talking freely about this right now. Like, this is where, it's very connected with, the quality and standard of living that we have. And just I just never really understood the, and I guess going and like talking to other people from different places, I guess you get you get why maybe some of that resistance comes up. Like, I've heard many times that sometimes, and maybe you can talk to this a little bit, where in the past there's been the kind of trope is that oil and gas is not very good neighbor sometimes. And I think I've heard that trope come up, and I think that's maybe one of the things, and maybe you could talk about that, where I think that maybe that's changing a little bit, where the industry itself is saying like, oh yeah, we need to, there's some important things we need to highlight, or some important stakeholders who we need to bring to the table in order to, develop this project in a better way, and kind of continuing improvement. So I guess, kind of a bit of a rant there, but I guess my question to you is, what are some things that the industry, I guess, can work towards, I guess, like in the informing people? Because I think it comes down to education, right? Like, and especially like educating, if we want to see like, that's, realizing the, Canada's potential. I think that's a big thing that comes up a lot is like, oh man, like Canada has like so many, there's just such an abundance of, of possibility here and potential. And then everyone gets mad. It's like, oh, we're not, everyone has a different opinion about how to develop that. And, once you start talking about it, everyone has a different opinion. I guess my question is what are some things that maybe the industry could do to inform people better
Educate the public.
Yeah, educate the public about what is, like why is this important and why, if you don't do anything about it, you might be shooting yourself in the foot, or making your life objectively worse.
Well, my view about this whole thing, it's about standard of living.
Yeah.
So energy's been very cheap for a very long time. And the only thing that was going to change people's views is it was going to start costing in the pocketbook.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we've seen. And so what has government's response been? Subsidize it.
Yeah.
So make it so nobody has to pay the price of what it means to have secure energy. I think that particularly in Eastern Canada, what is happening in Europe has been a wake-up call to many people that security of supply and security of energy consumption is not a right. Yeah. It's a privilege, and it has to be supported, or that privilege goes away, and it suddenly goes from being really inexpensive to being really expensive. And you see that to me, when people talk about the cost of energy, how most people see that is by going to fill up for gas.
Yeah.
And so, even if you think about heating your home, the bill comes once a month, and it's like, oh, that bill's high again or whatever. You go to the gasoline station more often, plus you drive by it every day, and it's like $125. Well, now it's $135, and or I go to put my $20 of gas in, and I only got a quarter of a tank. So I think that what people have seen probably the last years as energy prices, certainly at the beginning of the year of last year, where the invasion happens, we see oil go up to $125 a barrel, gas prices go to $8, $9. Suddenly people are like, whoa, my pocket is empty by the third week of a 4-week month. And I think that realization is my favorite story to tell about this whole thing is when Greta came to visit Calgary, and here she was marching down
When did you come? I'm
maybe 3 years ago now.
Yeah,
something like that. I don't know.
For mental health reasons, I don't always keep up with the news.
So there she is marching down the street with all these young girls, and they're all in their little fancy school outfits. And so the next day we're talking about this with some investment bankers, and I said, well, those are your children. You can go on and on about Greta all you want. I said, but it was your children who were skipping school yesterday, not the kids from Forest Lawn. So, whose fault is it that all these kids think fossil fuels are so bad? I said, you're getting, there is no realization that cheap energy pays for your 2 trips to Hawaii every year, or the fact that you're eating bananas in February, that there is no connection between those two things. So at school, fossil fuels are evil because the planet's going to cook in 2050 or 2060 or 2000 and something, whereas today, you're living a life that you enjoy, and I'm pretty sure that half those kids who marched with Greta that afternoon went home and had no problem getting picked up in their parents' F-150 or SUV or whatever, and no cognizant dissonance that these two things are related.
Yeah.
And
At the same time, they're tweeting on their phone about how bad it is when this thing was made in some sweatshop. Like,
Yeah.
So that I think is, and so the only way that ends is, and I think you've seen that in Europe already, because they got it worse than we did.
Oh yeah.
You know, that suddenly was, oh, well, maybe nuclear is not as bad as I used to think it was, because freezing is a worse alternative.
Yeah.
And
Dying sucks.
and and you know, and you look at how you know, the people of Ukraine have fought for their freedom. You know, I think it's changing. You know, 2 generations of people hadn't experienced the war.
Yeah.
And suddenly they are, and right on their back door. You know, it's not. It's still
not
probably
grandpa's
hard
story anymore.
It's
Yeah.
exactly. It's exactly that.
Or your
It's,
great-grandpa's
sorry,
story.
that
Yeah.
you know, that you don't. You know, you're living it now, right? So
Yeah. Question for you: What is your take on the nascent market of carbon credits?
well, you know, there's again, it's just another form of risk management, right? So
Yeah.
like, how do you know, it's still very nebulous as to what it means. You know, I think Europe was quite a bit further ahead of this than North America, but even in that case, you know, when energy prices started to move, and suddenly it was like, oh, this is not going to work anymore.
Yeah.
They devalued the value of the credits, so that, you know, more coal got burnt. So, you know, I think, you know, this whole decarbonization, it's a political animal, right? And
Yeah.
it's very politicized, and since most people, you know, by the time this thing is real, your grandchildren are the ones who are going to be dealing with it. And you know, it's like, you know, I always say the last time the weather was any good here is when the dinosaurs lived here.
Yeah.
So maybe global warming's not that bad.
Yeah. It's a slow, where it's a multi-generational problem, and and I think people have a hard time thinking about problems that are gonna go past their lifetime, right? Or
But the only thing against that is governments don't seem to mind spending future generations' money by running deficits today. That does appear to be the exception to that rule.
yeah, I remember I was talking with someone at university, and they said, like, I don't get, like, why doesn't the government just, like, spend more money, and and it's like, yeah, that's or it's like just
Start
buy more stuff.
printing
Like, there
cash.
shouldn't be any more problems. Like, and it's like, yeah, that's great for that time period. And it sucks for everyone in the future.
Well, exactly, right. So
Yeah.
and of course, if you think of, that is kind of the argument, that you should stay within your limits. So but staying within your limits sometimes means getting voted out.
Yeah.
And like, that's, to me, is my biggest issue with, doesn't matter who the politician is that once you taste power, you don't want to give it up.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so you'll buy people with their own money, and they'll take it because that's what
Yeah.
human beings are conditioned to do,
Yeah.
is to better to take than to receive.
Yeah.
So, or to than to give is
Receive
better to
some-
get.
yeah.
So
In okay, going back to a little bit, you mentioned that Pierdae is a production company rather than an LNG business. But
it's still there.
okay,
But it's not our primary business anymore.
so okay, inform me a little bit. When you say a production company, what does that mean? You're producing
Natural gas
Natural gas,
and
okay.
natural gas liquids.
Okay.
So butane, propane, and
Yep.
condensate. So
Okay.
so condensate is a light oil that's used to move the heavy oil down the pipeline. So
Okay.
propane, obviously, what that is, and butane today is used mostly as a fuel additive.
Okay.
So, but our main product is natural gas.
Okay.
So-
And would you is that our most production site? That's a well, right?
Mhm.
Or okay. And so where are most of your wells within? Is it all in Canada? And
Yes.
Okay.
So we are a foothills producer. So we basically have production from northeastern British Columbia all the way to the Canadian-U.S. border.
Okay.
Very much up against the mountains. That's so if we own 3 very large gas plants.
Mhm.
One down by Waterton, Jumping Pound, which is just to
Beautiful
the
park.
just to the east or west of town, right? So is Jumping Pound, and then we own another gas plant in Caroline, which is just north of Sudbury. So,
Okay.
so each one of these gas plants is, if you were to take them up to maximum capacity, and the reason we own all these assets is because it was going to be the base volume that fed into the LNG project.
Mm.
And so, going back to the question of the regulatory issue, the reason that this hasn't happened yet is because in Canada there's an enormous amount of pipeline risk, and because
By pipeline risk, is that political risk?
political
Okay.
risk,
Just gonna ask
political / regulatory risk, right? So, if you go back to when we first came into the energy industry, nobody talked about pipelines. That was if you really had a bad sleeping problem, go to a natural gas pipeline hearing, and that problem would be solved. So today, it's very controversial because these environmental groups figured out very quickly that the Achilles heel were the pipelines.
Yeah.
And if you could stop the pipeline, you stopped everything.
Yeah.
And that's the problem you have in Canada. So, the Trans Mountain expansion was supposed to cost $6 billion. The government buys it, and now it's going to cost $22 billion.
Yeah.
So building pipelines in Canada went from being a kind of routine business to a very difficult one. And it's why we're not competitive against the United States, and it's why our LNG project hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Because the ability to move product from one point to the next is very difficult to do.
Yeah. So in without a pipeline, your options are truck and rail, or those that, or not even.
It would be economically impossible to do that. So because the best way to move natural gas is by pipeline.
Mhm.
And so what LNG is natural gas on Earth wants to be a vapor.
Mhm.
So to move it by boat, you have to apply an enormous amount of pressure to the natural gas, and by applying that pressure, it turns into a liquid. So if you were to move to Neptune, Neptune is mostly liquefied natural gas or methane, because on Neptune, the pressure is so high in the atmosphere that methane turns into a liquid.
Okay.
But it's kind of far and it's kind of cold.
Yeah. Okay. So there's no. So at any given production site, there's no real. If there's no pipeline available, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
Okay.
So
you just flare it or put it back in the ground or
so
whatever.
Today, when if you look at how natural gas developed in the province of Alberta, it started in the southeast corner because that was closest to the pipeline that moved the gas to eastern Canada. Mm-hmm. As the industry developed, the gas was further and further away, and so today most of the gas comes from northwestern Alberta, mm-hmm. but the pipeline system is kind of more designed for the southern part of the province. So it's every summer comes and the pipeline system needs to be expanded, and that's when you run into issues. And because the cost of this whole idea that I talked about, the shale revolution that occurred kind of in 2009-10, the big breakthrough in that regard was multi-stage fracking, which that became another real flashpoint for environmentalists, because huge amounts of water, huge amounts of sand being pumped into the ground to break up the rock to release the natural gas. That's when you started getting stories of in Pennsylvania that there was methane in the gas and in the water, and you could light your toilet on fire and that kind of thing. So,
do you have and this is probably my little proud Albertan in me. It's like, could you maybe talk a little bit about the difference between environmental regulations in Canada and the U.S.? And is there, I guess for me, it's like, oh yeah, like Canada is like much more, it's like way better. Like we take care, or like our procedure of taking care of like cradle to grave is way better. but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Is there I don't know. Is that true or not true or
Well, I think
or it depends on where
you are, right?
Okay.
Each state is like the states have some issues like Canada does. Very much depends on where you
State
are.
have a lot of power.
So it's easy to get things done in Louisiana and Texas. It's really hard to get something done in Pennsylvania and New York. So kind of depends again where you are. And but I would say, environmental regulation, because it's a lot of the same companies, it's basically the same. So you wouldn't have a significant difference. That does not explain the difference between Canada and the United States. I think it's the real big issue, in my opinion, is the jurisdictional battles between the province and the federal government that really slow development significantly. That I think is the really big difference between the two.
Okay.
Has there been like any new investment in the oil and gas sector in the past, like, I wouldn't know a good year, how many years to put on it.
It's been, there's no doubt that I would say from 2008 to 14, the amount of money that was pouring in from different parts of the world into Alberta will probably never be seen again. Since 2014, a significant decrease in investment interest. Some of that, certainly caused by regulation and political risk that really kind of really changed with the change in government, and now because this whole decarbonization thing is a big part of larger pools of capital. That a good example is BlackRock, a very large private equity firm, ran into trouble with the governor of Texas because, and even though they manage a lot of big Texas pension funds, they kept going on, fossil fuels are dead, fossil fuels are dead. Well, we're fine, they might be dead, but you're not managing our money anymore. Suddenly it was, they're not as dead as I used to think they were.
Yeah.
I think money is starting to come back into the industry, but it's still a fraction of what it used to be.
Slow and steady.
Yeah. I guess one of the questions. Oh, yep. Sure. Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
3, 2, 1. And we're back. That's what I was going to ask. So, okay. So I think, we live in a quite of a divided time. Everyone lives in their own, little bubbles a little bit. I guess, is there any groups in Canada that are working on kind of aligning that front a little bit within province and federal government at all?
I think certainly there's industry groups, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, CAP.
Yeah.
But that's really what they do. They've really, if you look at any kind of commercials on TV, they obviously don't have any in Alberta. Well, they have some, but not very many.
Yeah.
Like you're preaching to the choir, right? So, they're the kind of organizations that are out there convincing
people,
other parts of the country
makes sense.
of why energy is an important part of your life. And like I said, but the biggest teacher is your pocketbook. And as people have less dollars to spend because energy becomes so expensive, because it's just not energy poverty.
Yeah.
Energy poverty creates food poverty.
Oh, yeah.
And like that connection, people have not really made that connection before. But as I said, it's another outcome of this war is that, the amount of world food insecurity that's happened since the war has probably quadrupled in the last year.
Yeah.
That because suddenly the country that was supplying a significant amount of food to particularly southern countries is gone.
Yeah.
So, where do you replace that? And it might be coming from here, but it's coming at market price.
Yeah.
And market price isn't cheap.
It was I can't remember what the number, but it was a pretty large sum that Ukraine produces wheat. Hey,
Oh, like percentage wise
yeah.
for the
It's like the
it's
largest
global.
producer of,
Yeah.
of wheat in the
Yeah,
world.
yeah.
yeah.
And that includes bigger than countries like Canada and the United States that are also very large producers.
Yeah.
Yeah, massive. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, definitely shifts the dynamics of the market there. Who? Yeah. In terms of, do you ever see a less political oil and gas industry in Canada, or natural resources industry in Canada, and has it always been like that? And like I know you mentioned that there was a bit of a deregulation period that and I'm sure it's kind of, like there's nothing new under the sun, right? Like,
Well, I think the one thing that is
people
changing
don't really change that much. So
is how much the First Nations are beginning to become involved. And I think that could be a game changer because instead of trampling over these people's rights, the fact that there's a desire to bring them on as partners now and have their communities benefit from natural
kinda
resource
as a partner.
production.
Yeah.
I think that could be a really big game changer because the environmentalists, their natural ally has been the First Nations, and more so from the fact that the First Nations haven't been listened to.
Yeah.
And so they got somebody who's willing to listen to their complaints. And I think if there's anywhere where the industry fell down is in building relationships with First Nations. And that doesn't really apply to northern Alberta because the oil sands have always had First Nations involvement. And more so depends on the community itself. But there are very many wealthy communities up in the north that, you would look like any neighborhood in Calgary and all built off of their ability to participate in the energy industry. So, but I think for the rest of Canada, and there's a large awakening that if you bring First Nations into the story, it changes the narrative quickly.
Okay, so how I guess how is that facilitated? Like, is that through the government? Is that through the company itself? Is it through?
I think if you wait for government to solve it, it will never be solved.
Yeah.
And and to some extent, government thinks the same way because they ask you to do what is really their job. Yeah. And but I think in the past, First Nations were very much more allowing the government to sort of set the agenda. I don't think that world exists anymore. And you can get much done by putting the government aside and just dealing with these people directly. Yeah. And they have legitimate complaints. It's unbelievable in this day and age that the Indian Act even still exists in Canada, and that there is no political push to end it. Yeah. And it because it has definitely put these people in a position of less access to the wealth of the country or the lands that they've always been a part of. Yeah. So I think that real, that fundamental change, and I think if anything, the greater awareness that younger generations have of what has happened to First Nations people in Canada is changing. Yeah, and sure and that is I think if anything that we have done a good job of, and why we were successful at Kitimat and why we almost got Goldboro done is because we took the time to bring our First Nation partners on side. Yeah. And I think that you can't develop a project today in Canada without the First Nations buy-in. Yeah. And so if you start there rather than try and end there, it's a different experience completely. And governments recognize that they, particularly the federal government, that they have a role here to play. And if you're if you're doing anything that excludes their participation, the likelihood of success is really close to zero.
Yeah. So I guess like when you're developing a big a project, any natural resource project, kind of like the people around the table are the the provincial government, the federal government, the company, the First Nation, and then the public, or the
Those are your main stakeholders.
those are the main stakeholders. Is there anyone else I'm kind of missing in there, or?
Well, I suppose there's always subsets, right?
Yeah.
So, for example,
But
depending on where you are,
top big,
Yeah.
the umbrella, the big umbrella. Those are kind of the.
So here's a good example. So, like down in southern Alberta, the resource base is large, and there's a lot of very large, wealthy ranching families.
Yeah.
And so for them, their view is the land, if can't be touched, right? And
Yeah.
so this is where cows live, and they don't want to have a wind farms or oil wheel rigs or gas plants or anything around our cows. So so there are different stakeholders even within the the broader community, if you want to call it that. But I think the early identification of those communities is really the key to being successful.
Yeah, and so as a CEO of a company who's pursuing a bit, I know not so much right now, but potentially in the coming up in the future, I guess what are some skills and some learnings, or maybe some stumbles in your career that really taught you what is important, and I guess what are helpful in your position today?
Well, I think this might sound a bit trite, but listening, I think, is a very important skill. And telling is probably at least an important skill, because once you lose someone's attention, they're gone forever.
Yeah. And
you may never get them back. So, I think that's probably, like when we started the project in Kitimat, we had never dealt really with First Nations issues before. Yeah. And the advice given by government was sometimes good, sometimes not. And it was walking through a minefield, and you could easily step on one, and you might set your relations back 6 months or a year or whatever. So I think that, and that really, the first experience we had with the Haisla First Nation really helped us in dealing with the First Nations and other locations, because suddenly we had a base from where to go. We knew what worked, what didn't work. And I kind of go back to one of my first lessons. As I said, I'm a chartered accountant by trade, and so I spent a couple of years as an auditor. And some advice I was given very early was like, everybody hates the auditor. So always make sure you have something else to talk about.
Yeah.
Isn't to deal with accounting. They said, because at least, that people think you're at least human then, right? And so like in my case, I'm not much of a hockey fan, but I always knew who won the hockey game.
Okay.
And so this is
a good fallback.
This was back when Gretzky and Messier and all them played for the Oilers, and as long as you could talk about something that didn't have enough to do with numbers, people were more relaxed about it.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we spent 20 minutes talking about something I don't care about. Now we could talk about 20 minutes about something I do care about.
Yeah.
And that's, and I think even when we first met the First Nations in Kitimat, that same kind of theory, just kind of were shooting the breeze with one of the counselors, and he happens to mention that, he was really into basketball, and he'd been trying to start a youth basketball league in northwestern BC, and so every time we'd meet, one of the first things I asked, hey, how's that going? What can we do to help make your league successful? And and because sometimes people don't have a big concept of money, right? And they think, well, we had $5,000. Yeah. We could do our tournament, and we could bring people from 3 or 4 different communities, and it's like, well, I think we could put $5,000 down, and it's like, oh, you would do that?
Yeah.
And it's like, why wouldn't we? We're trying to build a relationship with you.
Yeah.
And so I think that's that's where
Kind of rapport building.
if you take those two ideas together of listening to what was important to this guy, and then saying, okay, from now on, we're going to talk a little bit about how your basketball thing is going.
Yeah.
Suddenly, if it's maybe you're not such a bad guy after all.
Yeah.
So it's you're not the white devil coming to screw us over or whatever. And so I think those are if I was going to say to anyone, I would say my two big life lessons are those two.
Yeah.
That don't make it all about you.
Yeah.
And that having something else to talk about that allows no difference what we're doing here.
Yeah.
It's like engaging in people's interests. Because in the end analysis, most people are really interested to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
So
it's
it's
fun.
So I think that's one thing. Like I said, the second thing is listening. I could say our big breakthrough with the highs, they were always yelling at us for one thing or another. And at one point, the chief says to me, what really, really makes me mad is you won't even let us invest in your project. And I was like, what did you just say? And he said, well, you wouldn't let us invest in your project. I said, well, whoever told you that? And he said, well, we just assumed. It was like, well, if you would have asked, we would have told you. Well, your money's as green as anybody else's. So there's a good example of listening to what, instead of just tuning the guy out and so this rant will be over soon, that a very small but very valuable piece of information which ends up breaking the log jam, and suddenly we had a partner and the project gets moving. And that's how you turn 30 million into 300 million. So so I would say those are probably if I've when you're looking at skill set development, it sounds very very simple, but listening is actually a really hard thing to do because it's really hard to concentrate. And particularly if somebody goes on and on and on and on, and it's like, all right, I've heard enough of this already. But just before I came here, as I said, we were going through our annual reserve thing, and it's kind of like, okay, I've heard enough of this already. Can we get to the bottom line? And it's because in my perspective, the most important thing was to come out of that we all were seeing from the same hymn sheet. That if I get asked a question, or our CFO gets asked, or our COO, we're all answering the same.
Yeah, we're on the same page.
So that nobody can come to us and say, well, your CFO told us this, and you said this. Which one of you is lying? Because it can't both be right. So that's one. And again, I think that's where listening is an important skill that you learn a lot more than you do by not listening.
So switching it up here, what do you do to relax when you're not working? What's your free time look like?
Well, I'm really into working out now. So it's
what do you do to work out?
Well, I have a trainer because I would never go to the gym on my own. So but I'm probably in better shape now than I was when I was 25. So.
Oh, that's awesome. How long have you been seeing this trainer for? And what?
Well over 10 years. Well, not the same one. I go through more trainers than I do anything else. So I'd say since about 2004.
Yeah.
Before that, I was really into running.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, my trainer today, we're talking about. He's about to run his first marathon. So,
wow.
So.
Have you ran anything like that before?
3 marathons.
3 marathons. Wow.
About 7 or 8 half marathons.
Wow.
So it's not a great accomplishment, but it's more than most people.
Yeah, so it's more than a lot of most
people. So.
Yeah. What? When was your last marathon?
It was a while ago already now. So 2010. So.
And your last half marathon?
Probably 2 years after that. So.
Okay.
Ever since I had my hip replaced, running's no longer an option for me. So.
What? Which hip did you get replaced?
My left one.
Okay. I asked my dad got his hip replaced recently. So.
It's
How was the recovery for you?
Well, we were in the middle of buying some one of these production companies that we own today. So I did a little bit of investigating, and so I had my hip replaced through the front end. So in North America, most people have it done through the posterior, and it takes like 3 or 4 months to recover. By the anterior method, which is the front, it takes about a week to recover.
Oh, wow.
So it's
You're feeling good?
never felt better.
When was that? What year did you get that replaced?
Um, 4 years ago.
Okay. Yeah, no,
So-
my dad's recovery was pretty quick as well too. It was yeah, I think just a few weeks or something like that. Yeah, they get you up and moving pretty quick.
Yeah, well, you must have had done to the front end then,
Yeah.
rather than because if you do it to the back end, it takes a long time, months.
Yeah.
So it's didn't have months to recover. So it was like
Yeah. All right, come on.
then
Here we go.
do it this
In and
way.
out. Let's go.
Do you
So,
mind just scrolling down a bit?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Do you have any siblings?
I have 3 sisters.
Oh, right. One with a horde of dogs.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
And the others, are they the other siblings? Does everyone live in Calgary? Or you mentioned you originally were
from
from
Edmonton,
Edmonton, right?
2 of us live here and 2 live in Edmonton. So
Okay. Where are you in the,
I'm second.
you're the second oldest. Okay. And what's the age difference between you and all?
My older sister is 2.5 years older than I am, and my youngest sister is 10 years younger than I am. So
Okay.
that's 12.5 years spread.
Yeah. Okay, nice. What who's your favorite sister? No
The
comment.
youngest one.
Fair
One with
enough.
all the dogs.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
She's the easiest one to get along with.
Nice. Any nieces or nephews?
Yeah, we didn't really populate, so just have one nephew.
Okay, nice.
So he's going to inherit everything. So
Fair. Nice.
I'm surprised about
Lucky him. Yeah. How old is that nephew?
He's 31 or 2 now. So
Okay, so he's a bit older. Yeah. He's an adult.
none of us are young anymore.
Okay, fair enough. Eric, you got anything?
Yeah. Do you want to scroll down a bit more? I had one a big question I was trying to find here.
Oh, here's a good one. Do you have any beliefs or values that you hold dear?
Well, I would say honesty is probably the most important one. I like people who are honest with me.
Yeah.
And I'd rather be told something that don't want to hear rather than be lied to.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that finding out that particularly people that you trust have been lying to you, I think is the hardest thing for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
So and I try to live the same way, that even though sometimes lying is seems like a good way to not hurt somebody.
Yeah, the easy way out.
It's like that in the analysis, eventually the truth always comes out.
Yeah.
And I used to have a friend who I thought was the pathological liar. And he was a pathological liar. So, and it would be like, but he would just lie about everything. It would be like, how do you keep track of all the stories you tell?
Yeah.
Because if you just said, I don't want to go for lunch with someone, rather than come up with all the excuses of why you can't have lunch with them,
Yeah.
it's like I said, wouldn't it just be easier to say, hey, I don't want to have lunch with you,
Yeah.
and then you won't have to answer the same question ever again.
Yeah.
And Steve was, and then sometimes you think, well, when's the last time you actually told me the truth?
Yeah.
And I think that's to me that's probably the most important trait where I look for in a friendship.
Yeah.
Is people who are honest with me,
And
because I think that's the hardest thing.
I guess I found the question, and it would be to people getting into the industry and our age and trying to make their own way in life. What would be some advice that you'd give to someone like us too, for example, just trying to make their way
In the energy industry in particular, or
just
anything?
in life,
In life.
Well, I think I think you have to have some passion for what you're doing. Like if otherwise, why not just go work at McDonald's? And it could, you could be passionate about that as well too.
Yeah.
But it's because work isn't, that's why it's a 4-letter word, right? So it's not going to be fun every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you have to have a passion for what you're doing. And that may not necessarily mean that you're going to become the richest person on the planet either, right? But but I think you look at people who are very successful. It all starts in one place, and that's they have a passion for what they're doing.
Yep.
And so actually, it was kind of interesting. A couple of weeks ago, Calgary Opera had a opera on the life of Steve Jobs, and you think like, how's that going to be an opera?
Yeah.
And actually was quite interesting, and it was quite informative about how passionate he was about his ideas of how we could change communication. And like he really wasn't what do you call it, a tech nerd, but what he really was a communication genius, and that was
revolutionary.
That was his passion. Was how do you make communication better? And so I'd say for anybody, like like maybe you're not going to be life changing, but you should at least like what you're doing.
Yeah.
So
with regards to, I read that the biography of Steve Jobs. One of the things I really liked about one of the things at least in the book, I'm sure it's changed now, but he banned PowerPoint, and he said if you're able, you should be able to talk to something about something without having to. It just is a distraction, and you should be able to sit down and talk with someone about what you actually want to talk about. And I think that's kind of highlighted as it was about communicating. It was about the feeling that someone had interacting with the product, but that's what life, I think, to him was about. It was about the experience of life and the experience of interacting with not just something, but someone. I thought that was really, really cool. But with regards to passion, I guess what are you, in terms of your work, what part of it do you find is the one that wakes you up in the morning? Where you're like, this is my actual motivator. This is what I
think
like.
For me, it's building things. It's I think that has been what makes it interesting for me. Is like I think I'm relatively on the risk take. I'm a high risk taker in some regards. Mm-hmm. I'm not the kind of risk taker that maybe jumps out of airplanes, but certainly more personal risk in trying to accomplish something. That I'm probably much more a bit more of a risk taker in that regard, and but not certainly not. I'm not a fast car kind of airplane
business
jumping
risk.
Kind.
More business.
Taking just kind of. But on the other side of that, I think one of the reasons why I could do the things I do is that I like solitude. And coming home at the end of the day and being able to shut the door and the world stays on the other side.
Yep,
it's actually kind of what makes it work for me. That
the alone time
I do
is
kind
important.
I think for people who don't get a rest, and whether if work is difficult and home is difficult, life is difficult.
Yeah.
And so I've never had that. Like lots of friends always wonder, like, why don't you get married, or should you have somebody or in your life or whatever? It's like, well, for me, I would probably be the kind of person who would get divorced really quickly. It'd be like, why'd you marry me if you are stuck in your bedroom all the time? So, whereas when I'm by myself, I don't have to be in the bedroom because I have the whole house to myself. So it's, so I think that's kind of one of the principal reasons I just like to be alone.
Yeah. What do you do okay, keeping it PG, like what do you like to do when you're alone? Like what are the, do you read? Do you
mostly read?
What, I guess, like fills your cup up?
It's whether it's maybe meditation's a bit strong a word, because I don't think I actually meditate. I'm not sure how you do that, but sort of be able to just
like the deep relaxation
kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So it I like the arts a lot, and so whether it's going to ballet or the symphony or the opera or any of them, I like doing all those things, and I like going with groups of people. But I just like to veg out sometimes. And actually, it's one of these reasons I used to run a lot, because I used to find running an interest. You could do a lot of thinking, and problem solving, and
you can kind of go over the day or what you,
and then put it away.
Yeah.
So that doesn't work every day. Like sometimes, certainly had a lot of restless nights when things aren't going well, but I think what people see in me mostly is that I can stay calm and collected under stressful circumstances.
What are some of the strategies you use when you're under a lot of pressure? What, I guess, do you, what are some of the strategies you use to keep yourself level-headed and not get too much in your head or
Well, I think exercise is really important in that regard. I really, it's one of, how I ended up going to the gym. Because I think it was in grade 11, I vowed I would never step in a gymnasium ever again as long as I lived. And and it's kind of what I liked about running. First of all, it's easy. Right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. Yeah. Oh, avoid that crack. Right, left, right, left. Yeah. So not that difficult of a sport. And so when I ran my first marathon, what gave out first was my back, and that's kind of how I ended up going to the gym. Because I was talking to Dale about it. He said, "Oh, you got to go to Innovative Fitness because that fix that problem right away." And I said,
Dale's was a big gym.
So I went, and I'm still there, and it's like, how did this work out? But I do, even when I think about when I go to all you do at this gym I go to is personal training, so that people don't go there to work out. They go there to work out, but they work out with a trainer.
Yeah.
So it's this very small gym, and when I look at myself, so are the other people there, I know quite a few people that go to this gym, and never put their phone away. Whereas I don't do that. I leave the phone in the locker room, and I do my 45 minutes, but it's never So I think I'm very good at that, at saying, okay, I don't need
division of state and church, kind of. This is
this is my time, and I'm going to spend my time doing, I guess I said I'm in much better shape today than I ever was, and could lift more than I ever could lift, and actually most people at the gym, if they get a new trainer, because they go through trainers quite regularly, it's like, well, how old do you think I am? And of course, right away they kind of think, well, you must be can't be that young, because you wouldn't be asking if I were. And but they still think they're most surprised I'm over 60. So it's like, but I think that's being able to decompress it's the secret to longevity.
Yeah.
Otherwise, eventually you just burn yourself right out.
Yep.
And then nothing interests you.
Yeah. If you could get a message to a large group of people, what would it be?
Well, I suppose I do this on a regular basis, I guess. So I think that being kind and generous with people makes you happy in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that there is, I always think it's kind of amazing if they find footprints in the sand or whatever that are like a million years old, and it's a man, a woman, and a child walking. This is who we are as human beings, and I think probably someone like Putin is extremely unhappy as an individual because nothing goes his way. So, and the number of people that keep falling out of windows is probably a sign of that. So, I don't know. I wouldn't want to live that way.
Yeah.
I kind of go back to my core belief is if I'm honest with you, I'd rather you be honest with me as well. And,
yeah.
that doesn't mean you're not
Life
going
is
to like
easier with honest people.
You're not going to like everybody, and not everyone's going to like you.
Yeah.
And that's just a fact. So, trying to please everybody is a waste of one's time, and expecting everyone to please you is a waste of your time as well. And just sometimes things work and sometimes they don't, right? So and I don't think you have to be the center of attention all the time. My older sister's like that. She has to be the center of attention all the time. And that's, well, first of all, it's a hard role to play.
Yeah.
Because people get tired of listening to you after a while. Yeah. So anyway, it's, I run my business that way. I don't pretend to have all the answers. Mm-hmm. And I like to listen to what people have to say. And I think that's why more often than not, in being in a leadership position, I've had positive reflection back rather than negative that he's an ogre for a boss. Yeah, I don't think anyone's ever said that about me. So they might have thought it, but they never said it. So I think that's really who I am as a person. Is someone who people can trust, and the value of having money or wealth or whatever is to be able to do good things. You can't take it with you anyway. Yeah. So and you don't have to have it all for yourself. So, so I think if you can make other people's lives happy, and you're already halfway to happiness yourself. So
no man is an island, right?
So
I had a brain fart. I had a good question, but maybe it'll circle back to me. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Eric?
I guess moving forward in the industry, the technology and where that's going and the trajectory it's at, what kind of role do you think that's going to play in the energy sector?
Well, I think I think you can look at how employment has changed, and a lot of that has to do with technology. Yeah, the industry maybe was 250,000 people. Probably half that today, and production is 3 times as much. Yeah. So I think everything is easier today than it was with than it was before. Right? When you think that cell phones really haven't been around that long, yet today people can't live without one. 20 years ago, they were still kind of a new thing. And all of those things just change the way that things get done, and they build new industries. So it's like jobs that didn't exist before exist because of technology, and I think that's true with energy as well.
I remember I was sitting down with my dad and my brothers for a family dinner, and we asked him. I can't remember what the exact question was. It was something along the lines of like, what is the biggest change that you have seen in the global market or economy or work market? And he was like this, and he picked up his iPhone because it's been such a revolutionary pick. It changes how people behave. It changes how people look at the world. It changes So I don't know.
There's nothing that annoys me more than seeing 2 people out for dinner and both of them are looking at their phones.
It's brutal.
It's like, why are you bothered doing that? And now you can order in. So you could actually stay home, look at your phone, and order dinner. Yeah. So it's, I don't understand that at all.
And you just FaceTime the person.
It's like, why do you bother? It's like,
go ahead.
So I agree. The cell phone has changed everything, right? But it's also made new jobs. Yeah. So
one of the things I kind of along the line, I don't think the exact question came back to me, but part of it did at least. And it kind of has to go with that is, what's your, in terms of building a company, what's important in terms of the human interaction and building like a management team and a competent management team / leadership team? And what's your approach to that? And then when you find yourself disaligned or unaligned with, other people either on your board or in your leadership team, I don't know if I'm cutting in or out there or not, but
Perfectly fine on my side.
yeah, what are some of the things?
That's
you
a
found?
loaded question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So,
What are some important things to consider?
I think particularly between you need to have the top 2 or 3 positions, everyone aligned, because like in our situation, 300 families depend on the decisions we make, and if we're not all on the same page, it doesn't work anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And particularly when you go through periods of economic stress. And we had this situation, almost 2 years ago already now. It doesn't seem that long ago, but as the company was under a lot of financial stress, it was very difficult on our CFO.
Mm-hmm.
And he began behaving in a manner that in the end wasn't helpful for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And and it bred a lot of distrust, and to be frank, just about finish us off. So and in dealing with the guy who's our new CFO, from the very beginning, before he was given the full-time job, said, the number one thing we need to do is build a relationship between you and I. Yeah. I said, there can't be error between you and I. We have to be a unit. Exactly. We have to, think of it from the perspective of marriage. This has to be a happy marriage, because if you and I aren't on the same page, why would anybody invest in us?
Yeah.
And and all relationships take work.
Yeah.
Not just who you're married to. Your friendships take work. Your relationships with people at work take work, and nothing is a given.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about let's say Erik and his brothers. That my friendship was with their dad,
Mm-hmm.
and I sometimes see a friend of theirs, and they're always asking, how come the boys don't stay in touch with me? And I said, I don't know. Do you stay in touch with your parents' friends?
Mm.
I said, your friend was Dale. I said, hey, boys call me. I'm always there for them. I said, but do I expect them to report to me once a week to see how their life is going? No. I said, they weren't my friends. And I said, and I said, maybe you should think that way. I said, and so I don't know where he's at, but it is kind of funny. But I think, all relationships take work.
Yeah.
And, if you expect it to be easy, it's probably not a very deep relationship if it is.
Yeah.
So, and at work, it's important. You have to be able to listen to what other people have to say, and obviously sometimes decisions have to be made
Mm-hmm.
that people don't like, or you may not even like making it, but that has to be there. And because sometimes it's resource constraints
Mm-hmm.
that create the situation where you have to make a decision that is unpopular with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, in the end analysis, the buck stops at the very top.
Yep.
And if you're unwilling to make the hard decision, then you're probably the wrong person for the job too.
Yeah.
And you see that with people right now. There's actually quite a bit of leadership change in this industry right now.
Mm.
That and I think about my own position. It's like, I don't see myself doing this forever,
Yeah.
and that you have to be able to have enough faith in yourself to know when to walk away.
Mm. Yeah. What do you think in terms of like leadership within the industry? I guess what kind of leader is finding success, and what kind of leader is struggling a bit?
I don't know if I have a good answer for that kind of question. I don't really know a lot of these guys, but
Only
I think when you
only
think
see what from afar, right?
it,
Yeah.
but I think it comes back to what I just finished saying, right? I think it doesn't matter what you're talking about. running something for 10 years is a long time.
Yep.
And the likelihood that you have not run out of good ideas is pretty low. And I think that that's really the sign of a really good leader is when they know to walk away. And, the better to jump than to get pushed. And it's, and I think that's why you're seeing lots of change at the leadership level, and that it's probably is time for there to be a renewal at a lot of different organizations, and just because that's life in general, right? So if you hang on too long, it's I think it's just not good for everybody, right?
Yeah. So, obviously you're going to have a long and successful, I don't know, another 10, 20 years. What do you think?
I doubt that long.
Okay. But after
maybe months.
Yeah. Do you
more than weeks anyway, so in between weeks and months.
I guess it sounds like you're enjoying what you're doing, and do you plan on retiring ever?
I think that's coming sooner than later.
Yeah. What are your plans for retirement, or if you have any?
One question before, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Where would you like to see your current project go before you say farewell?
Well, I think it's important to Canada, and that's why we keep fighting, because it's otherwise, if I didn't think it would make a big difference, I would give it up a long time ago. Like, I think this is an important piece of infrastructure that needs to get done. But that's also one of the things, like I've been talking, I say, hey, if I can't get it done, maybe somebody else can. And so I think that building another production company, that's not really that interesting. There's lots of them. They come and go. And but to do something that would fundamentally change the energy equation in the Northern Hemisphere, that'd be kind of cool too.
That would be cool.
To leave with that, and so I think Canada can play a bigger role. We always have.
Yeah.
It's as a country we've listened to the call to arms, and this is a really sad time in our history that we can't do it now.
What do you think so far?
of
the interview.
Yeah. That's one. I didn't realize I can talk forever. So
whatever you work for time, we're good for whatever you're good for. So
it's
5:52 right now.
Yeah, so we'll probably maybe get close to wrap it up. Just
sure.
my mom has been staying with me, and she's going home tomorrow. So I just
really? Okay, then
go have dinner. So
sure.
Close it up at 6. Say give it a little 8-minute little closing.
Yeah, you were saying your mom's visiting you from...
She's from Edmonton, but she was born in Mexico City. So she just came back a couple of weeks ago, and then she stayed here in Calgary for a couple of weeks, but she's going back to Edmonton tomorrow. So.
Oh, nice.
But she hasn't been, almost be 2 months, because she was 6 weeks in Mexico. So, so it,
nice.
So anyway, we're just having dinner tonight before she goes home. So,
is your dad passed away, or is he still alive? Okay.
Yeah, so only just a few weeks before Dale did.
Oh, okay. Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it
was not a very good period of time in my life.
Yes.
So
how does your mom live by herself? Or?
Yeah, she does.
Okay.
Yeah, she's on her own. So she's very good health. And she's 87 years old, so she's not.
You'll have to say hello from Raiden and the Dixon boys.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, Raiden, do you have any more questions?
I guess just on kind of one question is, you mentioned that what you think is it's important for Canada, and important for that these project that you're doing in Nova Scotia could be bring Canada as a bigger role in the global energy market. I guess my question is, what do you think about Canada as the country, and what do you think about it you mentioned it's kind of a sad state we're in, I guess. What do you think?
Like where we could go with it?
Yeah, like what do you think the state of Canada is now, and where would you hope for it to be? What do you hope that it could be?
Well, like I said, I think that we could just play a bigger role. We are a resource-rich country. We're probably always going to be a resource-rich country, and but I think, like I said, the key to being more successful, I think, is solving our First Nations issues, or at the very least, making them partners.
Yeah.
And in what we're trying to accomplish, that the industry, whether it's this one or lithium or whatever comes next, if you look at rare earth metals and how they're mined in China, I don't think anybody wants Canada to look like that. I think I don't think we have to be the country that has 25 genders either. So it's there's somewhere between those two things. Is we're not a violent country. I think it's that is what I think people admire about our country, is the fact that overall it's still I think my mom said something we were out for dinner on Monday with a friend of mine, and my friend's partner asked my mom, he says, well, what's been your big notice of change from the time you moved here 65 years ago? And my mom said, well, she says, I always thought Canada was a very gentle country. And that's hopefully, and actually when I heard her say that, I thought, that would be nice that we stay that way.
Yeah.
And, if there's anything about to say about this whole idea of the polarization and that's, that's why this guy's got to go.
Yeah.
Because I think he has caused more divisiveness in this country than anybody, probably since René Lévesque.
Yeah.
And this guy's got to go.
René Lévesque, what was...
He was the premier of Quebec.
Okay.
He started the separation thing.
Okay.
So
that was his big thing. Yeah.
This guy's, I think, has done more damage than even he did.
Yeah. Time to go, JT. Get out of there.
It's so hopefully the rest of the country figures that out quick enough before we don't have one left.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's about it. Unless you have anything, Eric, you want to wrap up.
In closing, Alfred, thank you so much for coming on. We sincerely appreciate it, and it was as always, it's always super interesting, and helpful, and we really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for asking me.
Yeah,
best of luck with your podcast business.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope we can have you on in the future, and we can discuss maybe more as things develop.
There we go.
All right. Thanks, Alfred. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.